Discover prototypical track and turnouts with the Roadmaster series from Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply. Proudly made in the United States, Oak Hill's handcrafted turnouts provide unparalleled detail and accuracy, giving your layout museum-quality track work at an affordable price. Whether fully built or in easy-to-assemble kit form, Roadmaster provides all the details of real track. Looking for a custom piece of track work? Oak Hill can help with custom turnouts, diamonds, crossings, and more. Check out all of their offerings on their website, ohrtracksupply.com. Tully Models is hitting the road. Come see their growing line of industry and mill modeling details from Industrial Modeler Supply and Southern Tier Grain Modeler Supply, July 19th and 20th at the National Train Show at the 2025 NMRA National Convention in Novi, Michigan. Then it's off to the St. Louis RPM, July 24th through 26th at the Gateway Center in Collinsville, Illinois. Stop by and find out how Tully Models can take your layout industries to the next level. For more, check out their website at tullymodels.com. You've been hearing me say that advertising with Around the Layout podcast gets your business in front of our amazingly engaged audience. But let's hear about results from Mike Zucker at Spring Creek Model Trains.
Ever since we've been advertising with Around the Layout, we've definitely seen a nice steady increase of our outbound shipments through our website. Just being able to grow together has been a significant boost to us. It's just a great way for us to be able to show what we do. And partnering here through the advertising and everything is a great way to show off the hobby, support the hobby, and all the different facets that is the hobby of model trains.
Learn how we can partner and grow together. Email us at aroundthelayout@gmail.com. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com.
ATLP Rewind.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining me tonight, coming from Normal, Illinois, Alan Saatkamp. Alan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
And did I pronounce your name right?
You got it. You nailed it.
All right. Great way to start the show is pronouncing the guest's name right. I try to do that. And I don't know. I think I'm about 50-50 so far on that. So you're on the good side of the 50-50. Glad to have you here. You had reached out to me quite a while ago with some interest in coming on the show and telling your story. And here we are, and looking forward to it. I know you had kind of a preview from Isaac Fabris, and you've got a kind of a relationship with Isaac. Is that correct?
Isaac's a regular operator here. He's very good.
Awesome. He's got a great layout. Have you been over to operate his layout as well?
Yes, I've operated on his layout.
Awesome. Looking forward to getting Isaac back here on the show here pretty soon and getting an update on his, but I'm really looking forward to learning more about you, Alan, and your model railroading story. We've got an hour. Let's get into it, because I know you gave me some really great show notes. It's almost like cheating, but we're going to get everybody else up to speed on Alan and his model railroading story. So why don't we start in the beginning, Alan? How did you get started in the model railroading hobby?
Back in the 50s, my parents bought me an American Flyer train set, and eventually my dad, who was a pretty good handyman, built a double loop layout for me down in the basement. And that's what I enjoyed for several years, probably 6 or 7 years. I had a steam locomotive, I can't remember, and then I also had, I think it might have been a Fairbanks Morris and the Route of the 400.
Okay.
I played with those for a few years, and then when I lost interest, our parents sold the train layout and bought a ping pong table that fit perfectly down in that space. And so my sister, mom, dad, and I all enjoyed the ping pong layout for a number of years.
Okay. So the American Flyer set all went away, and you didn't have a chance to keep that, huh?
No, it went away.
Well, hopefully to a good home. And so the ping pong kind of takes over. What age were you about that time?
I think I was around just 11 or 12 years old.
About the time of the fall off, right? Pre-teenage years, and probably onto other activities and events. What gets you back into it?
in 1992, my dad passed away. My wife, Jan, suggested that we use a portion of the inheritance to, quote, buy something the children would enjoy. Our daughter was 8 and our son was 7 at the time. The die was cast. That took off. I remember sitting in front of, in our living room on Christmas Eve, reading Atlas Railroad's The ABCs of Model Railroading and thinking, what have I got myself into? Because half the terminology in the glossary, I had no clue what the terms meant. But the hobby took off from there. My son helped me with photography. He's been published along with my articles in several national magazines. Our daughter, I remember, helped me crawl under the table on a Sunday afternoon when our son was off playing with his friends and helped me doing some wiring on the layout when it was in the family room in our home in Sioux Falls. And she came home one day from school and helped me make some trees too. So my kids have been involved. They like to go on rail fanning trips with me. We'd shoot video, we'd shoot still pictures, and research is really one of the aspects of the hobby that I greatly enjoy.
Excellent. Yeah, that's getting the family hooked into it and having their involvement certainly is inspiring to keep things moving. I'm kind of wondering what kept you inspired. I mean, you talk about this American Flyer set in the 50s, and then you talk about the fall off when you're 12 years old. And then when your kids are maybe a little bit younger than where you were in the early 90s, what kind of kept them, that gap? What brought model railroading back to mind? And was there things in between, like rail fanning, or things that kind of kindled the fire a little bit, kept it glowing a bit?
The only embers that I can think of were that my next door childhood best friend, Jim Hastings, had a Lionel set.
Okay.
And although Jim eventually wound up moving to West Bend, Wisconsin, and had an N scale layout professionally built, Jim and I kept in touch. We'd call each other on Sundays to talk about our favorite team, the Brewers, or he was a Viking fan and I was a Packer fan. So we'd talk about pro football or baseball. And we also talked about a hobby that he stayed with all along, and that was model railroading. Jim had a small N-scale layout in his basement in West Bend. And so even though I wasn't back in the hobby till after my dad passed in 92, I think during the 80s, while Jim and I were communicating regularly, and we'd go and visit the Hastings in West Bend, I'd see his layout. And I thought, like my wife suggested, well, this would be a great hobby for the kids.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
I can share one other story with you.
Please do.
About building that layout. My father-in-law, Don Nelson, who worked on the Great Northern and then the Burlington Northern for over 40 years as an engineer, my father-in-law helped me build my first layout. I'm not a carpenter, didn't know the first thing about it, but I can recall Don helping me, and I read the conventional wisdom. It said, build the layout to a height that you will enjoy. Well, my kids were small at the time and not thinking ahead. I built the layout to 40 inches tall.
Okay.
And I'd come to bed at night and say, oh, my back hurts. And Jan would say, well, you've been leaning over that layout all night.
Right.
And guess what? The kids got bigger.
They do that.
I got tired of the backaches, so my father helped me retrofit another 12 inches onto the legs, so it got up to 50 or 51 inches. That was a lot better.
Was that good back relief right there?
That was good back relief, right?
Nice. How did your father-in-law feel about the model railroading thing? 40-year career in railroading. I mean, was he kind of, did he kind of take to it as well?
He did, but he didn't push it on me. When I said I was going to buy a Great Northern engine, this is in the early 90s, and he had just retired, I think. He said, you don't have to buy Burlington Northern just on my account.
Yep.
And he was a great resource because I didn't really know a lot about railroading, but Don certainly did because he'd been an engineer for over 40 years. And before that, he was a fireman. So my father-in-law, Don Nilsson, was a wonderful resource for me, not only as a handyman helping me build a layout, but also as a resource.
Yeah, when you can tell you've married the right woman, right? The father-in-law's into railroading, and she was encouraging.
Well, I think I married the right woman to begin with, but it did help to have my father-in-law in the hobby. And that reminds me of another story. If you remember the old Alan Keller VHS tapes from the 90s.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I remember distinctly Alan interviewed one fellow, and I can't remember what his layout was or his name, but he said on the interview, now, is it true that since you took up model railroading, you're much more handy around the house doing home repairs and such? And I remember the guy deadpan expression saying, well, that's what I tell my wife.
Yeah, another good reason to sell it, right? Yeah. Think of all the things I can do for you when I know electrical and I know a little bit of carpentry and I know a little bit of, it's definitely a good selling point for the hobby. Somebody had just put up in our group, we're recording this in early August. Somebody mentioned something about, asking, has, model railroading, adversely affected your marriage? And a lot of people were just chiming in and saying quite the opposite. Most cases, a lot of guys find the wife very supportive of their hobby. And, they know that if they're down in the model railroad room, they know exactly where they are and they're not out somewhere. And they're, and then again, all the skills, like you said, the skill set that's built. And it's kind of neat that it was actually, you mentioned the little bit of, but it was really kind of your wife's idea to do all this.
Right.
Yeah. So awesome resource. You got your father-in-law with all this information, and he's helping you with the carpentry, get the benches up a little bit higher. What becomes of that layout? Where does that end up?
The layout started as a 4x8, and then I added a 4x6 to make it an L. And then I added about a 2x8 to make it a U. And that was filling up a good portion of the carpeted, well-lit family room. Mm-hmm. So the next thing I had my eye on was the furnace room, because the furnace room was bigger. And the furnace room allowed me to go probably 10 by 20. And I remember teaching a community education class in Sioux Falls and giving the fellows in the class a little tidbit about if they had their eye on expanding their layout, a good strategic time, like it was for me, when I had my eye on a 4-foot by 2-foot corner around the cinder blocks. But unfortunately, at the time, it was right under my wife's clothesline in the basement. Mm-hmm. And so it's a good strategic time to ask your spouse about layout expansion around Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, her birthday. I find my spouse was more receptive to my suggestions during those times than if I had mentioned them at other periods of the year. Does that make sense?
We all, I think, struggle for to broach that topic. It's good that you've given this advice, because even I'm thinking about, some future expansion. But of course, I don't think she really listens to the podcast. So I think we can talk about it now. She says she does, but I don't think she's taking the time for that. I think that, that's trying to broach that topic, and how do I mention to her that I'd like a little bit bigger layout, and the food storage shelves are in the way, and the only real space that she has in the house is in the way. And, I want to take that over too. And, I think a garage and a breezeway's got to come first before I can broach that topic. But I do like your idea of picking some really pointed holidays to go after.
It's worked for me, Ray.
Oh, there you go. So it's been tested in the field. So I'll have to let you know how that conversation goes.
Okay.
It's a long way back to May and Valentine's Day. What was the other one? So we got Mother's Day, Valentine's Day. What is her birthday?
Birthdays. Her birthday.
Okay, we could work that. That's in November, so I got a little time to start planning.
There you go.
Excellent. So. But no, I mean, you're starting to do this. So you got your eye on the furnace room, and you've done some expansion. Is this layout the purpose of it? Does it have purpose? Like, are you doing operations on it, or is this kind of just a fun run kind of setup?
I've always had operations in the back of my mind, and it was set up for operations, but I did not have any sort of a car, cart, and waybill system. I was too much in the infancy of the hobby. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until we moved to Rapid City in 1998 that I started seriously thinking about how to incorporate specific industries and stations. And at the time, I got interested in the Green Bay and Western.
Okay.
So I modeled that, but we only lived there for 20 months, so I didn't get too far into the Green Bay and Western, and then it was off to Minneapolis. And that was really a catharsis, I think, for me. In 2002, my now friend and mentor, Gary Friesman, taught a community education class on model railroad operations. And although Gary still teases me that 2 of the 3 weeks I had out-of-town business trips, so I missed most of the class, but he was great. And at the end of the class, he took us to several layouts in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul area to see what fellows had done with operations. And Gary really got me into operations, and I got into the car, cart, and waybill system, and another fellow, John Thomas, offered to help me with DCC. He said those 3 magic words, I'll help you. Yep. And when I got into DCC, that really made a big difference in my operating scheme.
Yeah, I would bet. DCC just seems to add that, maybe third and potentially fourth dimension to model railroading, doesn't it?
Yes.
So Gary Friesman, he's kind of inspiring you. You got this John Thomas helping you with DCC, and you're starting to see this stuff. Twin Cities is a really great area for model railroading. We know a couple of those folks through the podcast and through other podcasts with Tom Geisher and Ken Zeska and many others. And then, of course, in that area, just so many great modelers. As you're seeing these operations going on and you're participating in these operations, how's that changing at home? Like, you immediately come home and look to make major changes to a layout?
That's a good question. I didn't make major changes to the layout. I was pretty set on the Wisconsin Central until the Canadian National bought it out. I could entertain a crew of maybe 5 fellows for 2 or 3 hours. And I was pretty happy with that Wisconsin Central Valley subdivision for a couple years up there. But I don't think it really changed my, I guess, yes, it did change, because after my first operating session, Gary suggested that we needed to have a coupler party. So he and a couple friends came over and we looked at coupler heights, we looked at wheel gauges. We got the layout to run better than it had that first session in the fall of 2004.
Right. Let's go back a little bit and talk about the Wisconsin Central and why you landed on that. What was what inspired you to model the Wisconsin Central?
I grew up in Milwaukee, so it was my home state.
Yeah.
There was a very good video on the Wisconsin Central that intrigued me.
Okay.
I think beyond that, and the paper-making industry in central Wisconsin. Plus, it wasn't that far away to go and research, too. At the time, we lived in Minneapolis, so to drive to central Wisconsin, Wisconsin Rapids, Stevens Point, it was only a 3 or 4 hour drive, as I recall. So the convenience of it was in part an attraction, too.
Yeah, because it's neat to learn how people start to really enjoy a railroad, and being near a railroad that you're modeling is a topic we actually just covered when we were talking to Joe Mammy. That it makes it so much easier when you can get there and experience the railroad in person, like you said you did.
I agree, and I wrote about that for Railroad Model Craftsman several years ago in their Perspectives column, the case for modeling a contemporary model railroad, especially one that's not too far away. I've modeled Progressive Rail a few times. I've modeled Twin Cities and Western. I modeled Wisconsin Central. I modeled Wisconsin Southern. So regional short lines, upper Midwest, that's my cup of tea. That's what interests me the most.
Yeah, that's your wheelhouse up there. That's for sure. And you seem like you've covered quite a few of them in different. Well, when you would go from one railroad and then say on to the next, describe that process. What would, saying like going from Wisconsin Central to Northern and whatnot. Yeah, and we'll describe this. I'm asking this question. You just dropped your head and put your hand on your forehead. So I must be picking at a point. So what was it that kind of kicked that off, where you would go from railroad to railroad?
That's the $64,000 question. I ask myself that frequently and regularly lately. Why do I change themes? I have friends who model in the transition era, so they have one railroad, a certain time period, and it's easy for them to stick with it. Yeah. But when I'm modeling contemporary and I'm modeling upper Midwestern, there are so many different choices, and some of these I come back to. And I'll be honest with you, Dave Fellon, who owns Progressive Rail, is the only owner of a railroad that I get a personal note and a calendar from every year. I don't get that from the UP. I don't get that from the Canadian National.
Right.
But I do get it from Dave Fellon and his former operations manager, Joe Fair, who has provided me with a lot of information, a lot of research. And that's one reason I like to model contemporary too. It's not too hard to get to. I had a cab ride on the Wisconsin Northern a year ago, June. I had a cab ride on the Progressive Rail and their Egondale line this spring. I had a cab ride on the Progressive Rail in 2014 from Northfield up to Lakeville. What other railroads can you ride in the cab with the crew and learn things, such as when riding on the Wisconsin Northern, I found out that the Union Pacific, which runs from Altoona to Chippewa Falls, paid the Wisconsin Northern to block their consist before they came and picked them up and took them back to Altoona because of, I think, space considerations. So I feature that on my railroad too. Yeah. And I use chalk marks, which are I-beam pieces of plastic, different colors, color-coded. And so the crews block the trains according to east, south, or westbound when the UP picks up that train and takes it back to Altoona.
When you start to get all that inside information, it really does. And, part of it, I think, all those cab rides and in the way they've treated you, certainly I'm sure loyalty comes into it. And then the other part being that inside baseball stuff. That's just so cool to learn.
I agree. I've had a ball with the upper Midwest and short lines and regionals, Twin Cities and Western too. When we lived up there, it was so convenient. We didn't have to hardly drive a few miles west of the cities and could ride all the way out to South Dakota if you wanted to and look at traffic going out there. But there are good videos out there. And in the last few years, I think there's also good YouTube. People go out there and shoot these things. Twin Cities and Western is just one of my favorites too, and that's what I model on half my layout currently.
You kind of hit on a good point here, which is, I'm mentioned I'm kind of thinking about doing something with my layout and making a change, and talking with Joe Mammy, who's kind of the expert in making changes. I pick on him, and maybe you fall in the same category too, open-minded to a fault, where you're not like one of those guys that can just say, hey, I'm X railroad and that's all I'm going to ever do. And this is it. In the end, they're the best. Where you kind of look, they've got some really cool stuff here. They got some great stuff here. There's a lot of neat things. I'd love the model of this part and that part. But the accessibility to information is so cool. And even like you said, being able to drive, like when I think about whatever I want to do, I want to be able to reasonably drive to what it is I'm modeling so I can experience it. But with modern technology, you can fire up, like you said, fire up a YouTube video and you're basically there. I mean, there's so many people out creating great content trackside, and you don't really even have to go across the country to experience a railroad.
It's a big help having our son living in Minneapolis right now, his wife, Emily, who he married last August, because Jan and I, my wife and I, make frequent trips up there to see our son and daughter-in-law. And so when we stay at Matt's house, Egan, where we used to live, and the Egandale Industrial Park is a 20-minute ride. So
awesome.
It's very convenient to go there.
You mentioned the kids, kind of helped you along the way. Talk about your son, and is he big? And when you go out to Egan, I mean, is he going with you? Is this kind of like a thing where it's big for him, or is he kind of is a dad's kind of thing?
It's Dad's kind of thing. He works as an architect, and so he's usually busy during the week when the trains are running. But he has, as I said, been a big help as recently as the January issue of Model Railroad Planning. He shot most of the photos for that magazine article, and I was flattered and honored to be selected for that. He's taken pictures for me for the last, I'd say, 15 years and had them published in Model Railroader and Craftsman and different Kalmbach publications.
Well, that's awesome. A great way to be able to still share the hobby with your son. And you said your daughter kind of has a play in that as well. Am I right?
She did. That? When she was younger, Megan did help me with some wiring when she was young. She could crawl under the table better than Dad could.
When it was that much lower to the ground, yeah.
Yes, she was. She made trees for me for a price, of course, one afternoon. And Megan and Matt both, when we lived in Egan, both of them got involved when my friend Mike Penn, who is an artist, came over, and Mike was showing me painting backdrop techniques. And so both kids got involved in helping me with painting backdrops back then. I have one more story about my son. When he was this was high school. This was in Minnesota. And his room down on the lower level was, my workbench, my desk was right outside his bedroom. So he'd come home from school, and I was working on the 3M roofing granule facility using one of the Walters steel mill kits, and I was building it outside his room. Well, he came home a couple days in a row, and he looked at it, and he pointed, and he said, "Well, Dad, that doesn't look right." And next day he said, "Well, you could do this better." And so the third day I said, "Here, you finish it." And being a future architect student and graduate from North Dakota State University with a master's degree, he did it. And he did a nice job on it. And he has been involved in model building for my layouts. I have still several of his buildings on my layout that he built for me, partly nostalgia, but partly because he did a nice job on them, including weathering them from 15 years ago.
Amazing. And amazing that, from that, like you said, going down to your bench and, starting that first one. And now he's an architect doing this professionally. Just yet another, as you hit on, the amazing amount of things that you can learn from the model railroading hobby and the directions that you can go from it. Yeah, especially that's why it's so important to get kids involved with it like you did. It gives them a taste of a whole bunch of different vocations.
Exactly.
So let's try to remind ourselves where we are in the story, because we kind of talked a little bit about Wisconsin Central and some of the layouts that you've done. And where does this journey take us after? You talked about your relationship with Gary and the inspiration he provided, and John's helping you with DCC stuff. Where does our story take us next?
In 2005, Jan and I moved back to South Dakota near Sioux Falls, where she grew up. During that time, I got the bug to model the Dakota, Minnesota, and Eastern short line, regional across Minnesota. And so I modeled that for a while. And then, of course, the Canadian Pacific bought it out. So I tend to lose interest in the short lines when the Class 1s buy them out. So I switched to Wisconsin Southern, and that worked for a while. And then it was actually Steve Glashinsky's book about regional railroads of the Midwest that got me super interested in the Twin Cities and Western. What a great looking engine. And guess what? It was only about 4 hours drive to go research it. So I got really hooked on the Twin Cities and Western. I was happy doing that. And then in 2014, our daughter was in Kansas City, and my wife decided it would be a good time to move there. So we moved to Kansas City. And for the life of me, here I had a triple deck layout in the furnace room in South Dakota, and I couldn't figure out how to do justice to the Twin Cities and Western in that small spare bedroom. We didn't have a furnace room in our townhome in Kansas City. Mm-hmm. So instead, I switched back to something I knew would fit, which was progressive rail. And that worked fine for about a year and a half, but still nagging in the back of my head was this notion, how could I do the Twin Cities and Western? And I figured it out on a smaller scale, and it worked. And in fact, my friend, the late Don Ball, wrote that up, and it got published in Model Railroader in June of 2019. And I did the Twin Cities and Western, and that was fun, and that was great. And then when our daughter moved here to Normal, Illinois in 2018, I thought, this is my dream layout. Age 70, finally, 650 square feet, finished family room, carpeted, LED, dimmable lighting. This was it.
Yeah.
So I went back to the Twin Cities and Western here and did that up big time for a couple years. And then some friends, including Don Ball, came to visit me on their way to Train Fest in 2019. And I said, I'm toying with the idea. I've been to some Packer games in Green Bay. I'm thinking about the paper industry again, and I'm wrestling with whether to stick with the Twin Cities and Western or do Central Wisconsin again, even though it's Canadian National and UP. And my friend Don Ball said to me, if it's fun, do it.
Good advice.
And I did. Yeah. And I had a year and a half to play with it because of COVID. I did not have any operating sessions for almost a year and a half. And then in late summer of 2022, I did finally start operating again. And so that worked.
So when you make this change, you're going to normal. You think Twin Cities and Western, and you're making these changes. How much did you learn? I mean, I guess the point I'm trying to make here, you've gone through so many different progressions of layouts and so many times. What were some of the biggest takeaways, like from, say, even if you think back to like layout 1 or 2 or 3 to where you are now, what was like the biggest thing that you could take away from all of that experience?
That's another good question. I think I'll say this. Some of the things I was interested in and some of the things I shied away from when I got back into the hobby are juxtaposed now, like backdrops. I wasn't any good at backdrops, but over time and practice, now I think I have some decent backdrops. Ballasting. Ballasting was the bane of my existence. I over ballasted my first layout in South Dakota. It was just terrible. It ran terrible. I hosted an NMRA division meet of the South Dakota division, Southeastern Division of NMRA, and it was just a disaster. But some of those things over time, and I remember another story. There was a hobby shop owner, Bob Hoff, late Bob Hoff, from Hobbytown in Sioux Falls. And one day I went in there on a Saturday morning. I said, Bob, we learned from our mistakes. And Bob looked at me and he said, well, you must have learned a lot.
Nice guy. But hey, it's right. I've made the comment on the podcast before. Nobody was born with Master Model Railroader on their birth certificate. It's all these things that you learn through experience, and you've had some great experience. I mean, multitude of layouts and builds, and you've got a lot of diversity in the hobby by going through all these builds. What would you say is you talked about, ballasting and, the challenges and some of these other things. What would you say your favorite part is? Like one of the things that we have to do to build a model railroad, like what task is it that really lights you up that you can't wait to do, or something you really are fired up about?
I enjoy utilizing my research to put together an operating scheme to have realistic trains, routes, car cards, and waybills. I think that's the part that jazzes me the most. And I've enjoyed over the last 4+ years seeing my relatively, for the most part, inexperienced crews develop and glom onto these elements that maybe at first were a little difficult for them. But when I have a new person into operations here for the first time, second time, I pair them up with a more experienced person, and then they learn from them. They're probably on the Digitrax radio throttle the first few sessions until they get the hang of that. But they're watching a more experienced conductor deal with the car cards and waybills. Yep. And I think part of my greatest enjoyment in the hobby is watching these dozen or so fellows develop their skills in operations. Don't get me wrong, I also have a handful of very talented people. Fortunately, they're better at this than I am, and they're good teachers too. They're willing to share their knowledge, and they've worked with the fellows from Athern Hobbies over in Champaign who came over, and some of the technicians got a chance to operate early summer, and I hope to have them back again this fall. So that's my biggest enjoyment in the hobby, is seeing people take to operations and enjoy the hobby for that aspect.
Why don't you walk us through a typical operating session on your layout?
For some dumb reason, it seems like Sunday afternoons are a good time to operate. This has never been true in South Dakota, Minnesota, or Kansas. But we'll take a typical Sunday afternoon, doors open at 12:30, briefing at 12:45 for newcomers and to highlight changes that may have occurred on the railroad since the fellows were there last. We try to start operating with a 4-to-1 fast clock at 1 o'clock. We run till 4 o'clock. Sometimes, just to have fun, I try to get the Twin Cities and Western crew of 2 out the door and looking at their trains initially because they have the most workload. They have 5 or 6 trains to run. So I get them out there. They leave the crew lounge, which is where we're sitting right now. You might call it a spare bedroom, but it's the crew lounge.
The crew lounge, yeah.
Yeah, the crew lounge. And so I've got the other 5 fellows down here, and I let them figure out who would like to do what. I need one person solo up on the Wisconsin northern end on L2. That's the road engineer. I need 2 people to work Chippewa Falls. That's the most demanding job. It has Wisconsin Northern as well as Canadian National work. And then I need 2 people on the staging yards, which represent Altoona and Stevens Point, Wisconsin. So once the assignments are made, I let the crews go out there, get oriented a little bit before I turn on the fast clock. It's set for 6 o'clock in the morning. We'll run for a 12-hour session or 3 hours. Sometimes initially, early spring, late winter, we ran considerably longer because the fellows were new at this scheme. It took them longer to get acclimated. But honestly, the last month or so, they've been done in less than 3 hours. It has gone very smoothly. It's just a delight for me to come into the crew lounge here, sit down after I've taken a couple pictures, put together my next issue of Prairie Pondering's newsletter based on the photos I've shot, and listen to the chatter out there.
Right.
Because these fellows talk about railroading. They talk about what's going on this layout. They might mention something about a cornfield meet that's held twice a year down in McLean that Tom Ludlam, the hobby shop owner at McLean, puts together for fellows, and they get 60 or 80 modules, whatever. It's just fun to listen to the chatter that's going on out there. Sometimes the guys will come in here for nourishment and refreshments. I tell my crews I want them to be well hydrated and well nourished. So I provide some water and some cookies or Chex Mix usually.
Nice.
That's a typical operating session. We brief out a little after 4 o'clock, get everybody back in here, go around the room, hear comments from the fellows. I tell them, if you want to say something nice about the railroad, you can. But if it's something that needs to be corrected or fixed, or you'd like me to be aware of that you didn't already bring to my attention, now's the time to do it.
Are your operators like fairly regular? I mean, or do you get some guys that kind of in and out, or, what kind of pool of guys are you pulling from to get your 5-man crew for an operating session?
Actually, it's 5 plus the Twin Cities and Western crew. So actually, I can run with 7 if we need to. The current call board is about 20 people. Awesome. Now, over the course of the 4 years, I've had a total of probably 36 people, but some just aren't that interested. Some aren't just that reliable. Some might come once a year, and I usually don't reinvite them if they aren't that interested.
Sure.
But I have about 15 people that I consider regulars on the layout. They come once a month, sometimes once every 2 months. I have another handful of people that are less frequent, but they seem to be interested and they want to learn about it. So roughly I have a nice call board of 20 people. And I feel so blessed because, Ray, during ProRail in Kansas City in April, I heard more than once from fellows from around the country who lamented the fact that either due to mobility issues, mortality issues, people's living situations changing, people moving away, a lot of those folks have trouble garnering a crew to host an operating session anymore.
Right.
And that's not the case here. I feel very blessed. Tom Ludlam at the hobby shop has referred me. Probably half of my 20 people have come through contacts from Tom, including most recently Daniel Cates, who's just been coming the last couple of months, who I met down at the hobby shop.
Well, I would say, I mean, I definitely agree that you're blessed. I would say that you've probably gone beyond luck and done something right to try to get a pool of 15 people that you can, regularly pull from and put together a 7-man crew. I'm kind of wondering what your secret to success is. I mean, networking seems to be kind of a big part of that.
I think it is networking. When folks come into the hobby shop in McLean, or they're interested and participate in these cornfield meets.
Right.
Tom has been just excellent at giving me emails or contact information. I go to these cornfield meets too, periodically and meet folks down there. It is word of mouth in part. Some of that is word of mouth. I agree. But you're right. Something's going right, because to have over 15, 20 people at this point in the hobby, and only about a handful live in Bloomington Normal proper, a lot of them are 15, 20 miles out. It's really a blessing.
I also think maybe a little bit of communication is also helping you here. And you mentioned it a few moments ago. I want you to tell me a little bit more about this other hobby you have of creating this newsletter, the Prairie Ponderings. Tell me about that. How'd you get started doing a newsletter?
I studied journalism at Wisconsin when I was in college, and I always enjoyed writing.
Yeah. So
I thought a good way to document my early efforts on the Wisconsin Central was and no pictures. This is back in 2004. It's just typed and emailed, a couple-page newsletter called Points from the Junction, referring to Junction City, Wisconsin.
Okay.
When we moved to South Dakota, let me get my facts straight here. Yes, we moved back to South Dakota in 2005. And when my friend Jerry Leone from the Cities decided that he wasn't going to be the editor of The Fusey, which is the Thousand Lakes Region NMRA newsletter anymore, and I couldn't find anybody else to do it, he taught me how to do photography and how to pull pictures into the newsletter.
Okay.
And next thing, I was doing the newsletter, and I could do my own newsletter, which, since Points from the Junction didn't really apply, since I wasn't modeling Wisconsin Central anymore, it became Prairie Ponderings. And my son, who has good graphic art skills, I think I sent you a copy.
You did.
Matt did the masthead for me. For the enjoyment and edification of model railroad hobbyists. So I got into the newsletter business because I had this burning desire to document what I was doing on the railroad and share it with others. I have friends in Australia, Canada, all over the States. I have 100-some, quote, subscribers, unquote. I think probably half of them just delete it when they get it, but they haven't told me they don't want it anymore. So I continue to send it out probably 6 times a year.
That's great. And, and it kind of draws in comparison. Pre-show, we were talking about the podcast and, my why about around the layout. And, it's kind of in that same similar thing. It's just, it's so enjoyable to be able to share the hobby, whether you're me and doing a podcast or you creating this newsletter. It's always a lot of fun to be able to share the hobby with other people.
Exactly. I don't build this layout for myself. I build it for my friends to come and operate it. That's the enjoyment I get out of it. I build it. I have satisfaction in building it, but I wouldn't say my enjoyment comes from building it. My enjoyment comes from putting it through its paces and seeing this miniature transportation system come to life for 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon. And especially enjoyable, Ray, are when my friends from either South Dakota or Kansas City come through here and come and operate on my layout. That's a lot of fun to see them again and host them again, because some of them I go back 18 years with.
Yeah, that's amazing. The friendships you build. Again, another thing I like to say a lot is this hobby is so much better shared. I mean, if you're a lone wolf and that makes you happy and you're comfortable, listen, I'm not saying anything about that. I'm just saying that if you're somebody that, you know, thinks that you may enjoy a little bit of social aspect of the hobby, put yourself out there, because there's a lot of people just like you who want to share it as well. You'll learn a lot, and boy, it's just inspiring to be able to keep going and building a layout so you can have people over, or you can go to their layouts and enjoy what they've done and get ideas from them and others and share it. And it just have that whole community is just really an amazing thing.
That's one of the areas I'd like to touch on for a moment, and that is, we talked about NMRA a bit. Mm-hmm. I was superintendent of the Dakota Southeastern region in Sioux Falls area, but then also we had an opportunity to serve on a greater scale as president of the Thousand Lakes region and then publisher of the newsletter. And while I was actively involved in the Thousand Lakes region, the achievement program caught my attention. Mm-hmm. So one of the fellows in our local division had gotten the Golden Spike Award, and I thought, well, that's something I could probably do. And a few years later, I was getting my Master Model Railroader, and that has been truly a blessing in terms of what I've learned about especially building freight cars, and also the friendships I've made, because people are willing to help you and give you advice and teach you.
Yes. Yeah. For the one person who may not, there's 1,000 more that are just willing to just jump in and teach, you know, and especially if you find those people that have the heart of a teacher that'll walk alongside you, not push you, not pull you, just walk alongside you. There's a lot of amazing people like that in this hobby.
For sure.
So have you finished your MMR?
Yes, 2012.
Awesome.
When
Congratulations.
We hosted the Thousand Lakes Region Convention in Sioux Falls, I completed that. Another neat thing was that we had something called Midwest Rail Car Repair located in Corson, just 5 or 6 miles north of Sioux Falls. And through the previous co-owner, who was dad to a fellow I worked with, I got access to Greg Carman, the owner, the president, and Greg let me climb over freight cars, take measurements so I could get it right and build a bunch of gondolas towards MMR, a number of which I donated back to his showcase in the front office. Awesome. And Greg also did tours for events such as I hosted operating weekends for 3 or 4 layouts in our area called Sioux Rail several times. And then also our 2012 NMRA convention. Greg was gracious enough to have a couple of his folks do guided tours of Midwest Railcar Repair. And you don't get that everywhere. It's not available always, and very generous of him to help us out in that regard.
Well, it seems like you create a lot of these opportunities too. You're not a guy that's afraid to stick his neck out there a little bit and get in and look, you know, it's kind of like that saying, it's always a no unless you ask, right?
That's an interesting point. I know I'm an introverted person, and sometimes, occasionally, when you call an industry and ask about it in terms of its rail service, you might get a hang up or a no thank you. But predominantly, I've had very good luck when I work up the courage to call or visit an industry and show my genuine interest in what they're doing with the railroad. I've learned tons of information from those folks at various industries in multiple states.
Right. It's so cool. I mean, you talk about the cab rides you've had, the industry information you get, maybe you do have some introvert, but there's a lot of other stuff going on there. That's some fascinating things to, you must know the right things to say and, just be polite and show genuine interest, like you said, and look at the amazing things that happen.
I think these small, short lines and regionals, the people there, I think, are flattered that you're interested, and so they're willing to share with you. And I know Dave Fellon, Progressive Rail, I'll come back to him again. He is a fellow hobbyist. Mm-hmm. Although my friend Joe Fair said he's maybe going over to the dark side and going to N scale instead of HO. I can't confirm that. Please take that with a grain of salt. But I think the short line and regionals are maybe more interested in people than the class ones can afford to be in this day and culture. Just my opinion.
Well, hey, I mean, not every door is open, but the ones that are open, if you can find a way to be polite about it and take the right approach, amazing things can happen. The information you get. And when I start getting that kind of information, I just, inside baseball stuff, it just gets my mind rolling about how to apply it. Right. It's like,
yeah.
Oh, wow. Like you said about operations, it's like, I mentioned again in that Joe Mammy episode, Joe and I went down, we looked at the railroad he's looking to model. And, it's like not only he was running home with ideas, and then I was like, my mind's rolling about some other ideas. And, how could I apply this? How could I make this work in a model railroad? How could I get it into compression? So it really is awe-inspiring just to be able to get that kind of that information. So, Alan, as we're wrapping up here on Around the Layout, I just wanted to, again, appreciate you being on and sharing your story. It's really amazing the stuff that you've done and the railroad you touched upon and how you've gotten to here. What's next for your layout?
What? You don't think I'm going to stay static and model the Twin Cities and Western and Wisconsin and Northern for the next decade?
I don't know. Right, you've shown the ability to change, so I got to ask.
That's true. I had intended to keep this under wraps and perhaps write a Prairie Ponderings another April Fool's 2024, but I don't think I can do it because I can't keep a secret. So I am planning to go 100% progressive rail next spring because there's the Egandale Industrial Park, there's the Lakeville Industrial Park, there's interchange with the CP and the UP at Northfield and a big multi-meal plant. So I've got the space and I've got the interest. I've got all the structures built and I've got a lot of information already. So next spring, I'm hoping to model the progressive rail Minnesota lines in pretty accurately.
We're going to call that an Around the Layout exclusive. So
that's fair.
We will definitely be looking forward to more updates from you through Prairie Ponderings, and then we'll definitely get you back on the podcast. You can tell us more about your updates and hear more about some changes that you're going to be making. Looking forward to that.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. and send us your feedback around the layout at gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.